The sun blazed fiercely overhead, casting an oppressive heat across the endless stretch of barren desert. Winds howled through the dunes, carrying the echoes of long-forgotten stories as they stirred the glittering sands, each grain shimmering like tiny fragments of crystal. In the midst of this harsh, unforgiving landscape stood a solitary figure, a young alien woman, her fiery red hair cascading wildly down her back. Her presence seemed like a vision from another realm, an ethereal being, out of place in such a desolate, cruel environment. Her soft, luminous blue skin, bathed in a subtle glow, marked her as something extraordinary, otherworldly. Her large, innocent eyes, the color of the deep, endless sky, mirrored the vast horizon that stretched out before her. Yet, despite her beauty, she was alone, forsaken in this desert wasteland, abandoned by those who should have protected her. Once a princess in a distant star kingdom, her name had held weight and power. But that had all crumbled when her mother, a cold, calculating queen, cast her out. She had left her daughter exposed naked to the elements and to the dangers of the human world, indifferent to her innocence and purity. Her mother had seen her not as a beloved daughter, but as a pawn, a tool to tempt and control humans with her beauty. Word of the abandoned alien princess spread quickly through distant villages and kingdoms. Men, drawn by rumors of her unearthly allure, came to the desert not to save her, but to claim her as their own. However, as the first of these men approached, something unexpected happened. The girl's innocence, though she did not yet understand it, possessed a quiet power. It repelled those whose hearts were consumed by darkness, keeping her safe for the moment. As the shadows of evening began to stretch across the desert, a small group of travelers stumbled upon her. Among them was a man named Rylan, a human adventurer with a heart untainted by the greed and desire that plagued so many others. His life had been spent exploring ancient ruins and forgotten places, and as he gazed upon the alien girl, his heart was moved not by lust but by compassion. "What happened here?" Rylan muttered, stepping toward her. The girl blinked, her full lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. She had never spoken to humans before, only heard of them through her mother's cruel tales. Her wild red curls framed her face, a fiery contrast to her blue skin, and her expression was a mix of fear and curiosity. Rylan knelt beside her, offering his cloak. "Here, take this," he said gently, draping it over her trembling shoulders. She pulled it tightly around herself, grateful for the unexpected kindness. The warmth of her skin beneath his touch sent a jolt through him, but his thoughts remained pure, unlike those of others in his group. Their eyes lingered on her with ill intent, but Rylan's presence kept them at bay, for now. As night fell, the travelers set up camp. The girl, still silent, stayed close to Rylan, watching the flames flicker in the fire pit. Her mind swirled with questions. Why had her mother done this? Why were these humans so different from the ones her mother had warned her about? Yet, in the midst of her confusion, a new feeling began to stir within her hope, something she had never experienced before. Rylan promised her safety, his voice steady and reassuring. "We'll take you somewhere safe. You don't deserve this," he said softly, his gaze filled with sincerity. She didn't fully understand his words, but she trusted him. For the first time since being cast out, she felt a sense of protection. However, danger lurked nearby. Unbeknownst to her, someone within the group had their own sinister plans. A man named Varys, a rogue with greed festering in his heart, had been watching her closely. He had not joined the travelers for adventure, but for profit. The tales of treasures hidden in the ruins they sought had drawn him in. But now he saw a far greater prize, the alien girl, whose beauty surpassed even the wildest stories he had heard. As they journeyed toward the ancient ruins, the landscape shifted from sandy dunes to jagged cliffs. The path became more perilous, and the tension within the group grew. Rylan walked beside the girl, his protective presence a silent deterrent to the others. Yet Varys, trailing behind, bided his time. His eyes gleamed with greed, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The girl remained silent, absorbing the strange, new world around her. She had never known the rustle of leaves or the song of birds, sounds foreign to the Star Kingdom she once called home. As they walked, Rylan asked gently, "Do you have a name?" She hesitated, her brow furrowing in confusion. The name her mother had given her was one of control, a symbol of her past imprisonment. "I don't have one," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Rylan nodded, understanding. "Then I'll call you Ember, for your hair," he said with a warm smile. She repeated the name softly, testing the sound. It felt strange, but also fitting. As night descended once more, Varys began to set his plan in motion. Hidden in the shadows, he schemed to take what he believed was his by right. He knew that the ruins ahead were fraught with danger, but those dangers could be manipulated to his advantage. Dawn broke slowly, casting a pale light over the rough terrain as the group of travelers moved deeper into the desert's rocky landscape. The jagged cliffs loomed overhead, their sharp edges slicing the sky into jagged fragments. Ember walked close to Rylan, her bare feet brushing over the uneven ground, now partially protected by his cloak. Her vibrant red hair, glowing like embers in the rising sunlight, caught the occasional breeze, stirring a strange warmth within her. Though she still didn't fully understand the human world, she felt something she had never experienced before. Safety. Rylan's kindness had been unexpected, and though the others kept their distance, their dark intentions were not lost on her. She could feel the weight of their gazes, especially the one from the man who walked just behind them. Varys. He had been watching her closely since the night before, his eyes never leaving her whenever Rylan wasn't looking. Ember could feel something sinister in his presence, a coldness that clung to him like a second skin. But she didn't know what to do about it. Her trust lay with Rylan, and as long as he stayed near, she believed she would be safe. But safety in this world, as she would soon learn, was fragile. The terrain grew steeper as they neared the entrance to the ancient ruins. The rocky path twisted and turned, and loose stones tumbled beneath their feet, making each step treacherous. Ember's legs ached, unaccustomed to such harsh travel, but she pressed on. Ahead, the crumbling walls of the ruins began to rise out of the sand, their dark, weathered stones standing like silent sentinels guarding the secrets of an ancient civilization long forgotten by time. "We're almost there," Rylan said softly, glancing over at Ember. His tone was reassuring, though his eyes held a trace of concern. He knew the dangers that awaited them within the ruins, traps left by the builders, wild creatures that had made the place their home, and the greed of men like Varys. As they reached the entrance, the group paused. The air felt colder here, and a strange stillness had settled over the area. The ruins stood like a dark promise of both treasure and peril. Rylan gestured for the others to remain cautious, his voice steady but commanding. "Stay alert. We don't know what's inside." Varys, however, had no intention of following orders. His mind raced with plans, his gaze flickering between Ember and the ruins ahead. The moment they stepped inside, he would make his move. He knew the group would be distracted by the ancient traps and treasure, and that would be his chance. Rylan took the lead, guiding Ember into the darkened corridor of the ruins. The air inside was thick with dust and the faint smell of decay. The walls were etched with strange symbols, long faded, and the stone beneath their feet was worn smooth by centuries of abandonment. The silence was eerie, broken only by the occasional echo of footsteps. Ember's eyes darted around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. This place felt ancient, older than anything she had ever seen. It reminded her of the stories her mother had told of forgotten realms and civilizations that had crumbled under their own hubris. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, as if the walls themselves carried the memories of those who had once walked here. Rylan stayed close to her, his presence a calming anchor. He could see the fear in her eyes and offered her a reassuring smile. "Stay close. We'll be through here soon." But Varys had other plans. As they moved deeper into the ruins, the group came upon a large chamber. At its center stood a stone pedestal, and atop it lay a chest, half buried in rubble. Rylan motioned for the others to stay back as he inspected it, wary of any traps that might have been laid to protect the treasure. In that moment, Varys saw his opportunity. While Ryland's attention was elsewhere, he slipped silently toward Ember, his hand reaching for her arm. His grip was firm, and she startled, turning to face him with wide, frightened eyes. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Varys's lips curled into a smile that sent a chill down her spine. "You don't belong with him," he hissed, pulling her closer. "You're wasted on someone like Ryland. You and I, we could be something more. You don't know what he's really after." Ember recoiled, trying to pull away, but Varys tightened his hold. She could feel the darkness in him now, more clearly than ever, like a festering wound. Fear surged through her, but at the same time, something deep within her began to stir. A strange energy, something ancient and powerful, that she had never felt before. It pulsed beneath her skin, faint but growing. Before she could react, Varys dragged her toward a shadowed alcove at the edge of the chamber. "We're leaving," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "No one's going to stop us. Not him. Not anyone." But Ryland noticed Ember's absence almost immediately. His eyes darted around the room, and when he saw Varys pulling her away, a surge of anger shot through him. He moved swiftly, closing the distance between them in seconds. "Let her go, Varys." Ryland's voice was calm, but deadly serious. Varys sneered, not releasing his grip. "Why should I? She's not yours to protect." Ryland stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "This isn't about ownership. It's about what's right. Let her go." For a moment, the two men stared each other down, the tension thick in the air. But Varys, driven by greed and desperation, wasn't ready to back down. He pulled Ember closer, using her as a shield. "You're a fool, Ryland. You don't even know what she is, do you? There's power in her. Power you're too weak to take advantage of." Ember's heart raced, the strange energy inside her growing stronger with every second. She didn't understand it, but she knew that if Varys took her, something terrible would happen. The power inside her wasn't meant for someone like him. It wasn't meant for anyone like him. As the standoff continued, the ruins seemed to hum with tension, the ancient stones holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. And in that moment, something within Ember snapped. The energy surged, flooding through her like a river breaking through a dam. Her eyes, once wide with fear, now glowed with a strange, otherworldly light. The air around her crackled with unseen force, and Varys, sensing the shift, hesitated. His grip loosened for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. With a single, instinctive motion, Ember raised her hand and unleashed the power within her. The moment Ember's hand lifted, the air in the chamber seemed to shift. It was subtle at first, an almost imperceptible ripple, but then it grew, like a wave crashing against the walls of the ancient ruin. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the faint glow of her skin intensified, illuminating the dark, crumbling stones around her. Ryland's eyes widened in shock as the energy emanating from her pulsed and twisted, responding to her unspoken command. Varys, still gripping her arm, was momentarily stunned. His eyes darted between her and Ryland, confusion flashing across his face as he sensed the surge of power, something far beyond his understanding. He had expected fear, weakness, an alien princess alone in a foreign world, but this was something else entirely. It was as if she were no longer just a girl abandoned in the desert, but something far greater, something with abilities that defied the natural laws of the universe. "Let me go!" Ember shouted, her voice stronger now, resonating with an authority she hadn't known she possessed. Varys, his grip still tight on her, sneered. "You think you can stop me? You're just a child. An alien. What power do you truly have?" But the energy around her only intensified. It crackled like electricity, the air thick with power. Ryland stepped forward, realizing the gravity of the situation. "Varys, you need to let her go now," he said, his voice low and dangerous. He drew his sword, not to threaten, but to defend, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. Suddenly, Ember's eyes narrowed. She was no longer the frightened girl, lost and confused in a strange world. Something had shifted inside her, something ancient, primal. Her hand, still raised, began to glow with a blinding blue light, and the air around them hummed with an almost deafening force. The ruins themselves seemed to respond. Stone dust fell from the ceiling, and the walls groaned as if they were waking from a deep slumber. Varys's eyes widened in terror. His instincts screamed at him to let go, to run, but it was too late. He had underestimated the girl, the power she held. He had thought her beauty was her only weapon, but he now saw that she was far more than he could ever have imagined. With a sudden, violent motion, Ember's arm shot forward, and a surge of energy exploded from her palm. Varys was thrown backward, crashing into the stone wall with a deafening thud. His body slumped to the ground, dazed, his breath ragged. He tried to stand, but his limbs felt heavy and useless, as though the very air around him had turned against him. His eyes, filled with fear and disbelief, met Ryland's. The adventurer stood motionless, watching with wide eyes as Ember's power unfolded before him. He had never seen anything like it. "Ember," he said softly, taking a cautious step toward her, unsure of what else to say. The air around them crackled with tension, and the ruins seemed to pulse, as if responding to her very presence. Ember looked at him, her expression calm but distant. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know I could," she whispered, her voice trembling as she lowered her glowing hand. The blue light faded, but the aftershock of her power remained, lingering in the air like the remnants of a storm. Ryland reached her side, his hand resting gently on her arm. "You're not alone," he said softly, his tone filled with empathy. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. But you need to understand, this power, this isn't something you can hide from. You're not just a princess. You're something much more." Ember blinked at him, her large eyes searching his face for meaning. Her mind was still reeling from the event that had just transpired. She had never felt such power before, and the realization that she could wield it terrified her. She wasn't used to this feeling, control over others, control over her own destiny. Her mother had always been the one who made decisions, the one who held the power in her world. Now, she was forced to navigate a new reality, one where she was no longer simply a pawn in someone else's game. Ryland gave her a reassuring smile, though concern flickered in his eyes. "We'll help you. We'll figure out what's happening," he promised. Ember's gaze turned toward Varys, who was now on his knees, coughing and groaning. The sight of him, crumpled and defeated, stirred something within her, a mix of pity and distaste. She had never wanted to hurt anyone. She had only wanted to survive. But now, with this newfound power, she felt like she could destroy anything in her path if she chose to. Varys, still dazed, tried to push himself up, but faltered. You're a monster," he spat, his voice full of venom and fear. "You're not human. None of you are. You're cursed nothing but a weapon waiting to be unleashed." Ryland shot him a dark look, stepping in front of Ember. "You don't know anything about her," he said, his voice hard, "and you'll never get the chance to." Varys's eyes flickered with fury, but his body was too battered to respond. He could barely lift his arm. He glared at Ember one last time, hatred burning in his gaze. "You can't control it," he muttered almost to himself, as he finally slumped against the wall. "They'll come for you. All of them. You're not safe here. You never will be." His words echoed through the chamber, chilling the air. But Ember didn't flinch. If anything, she felt a cold clarity settle over her. She had been abandoned, left to fend for herself in a hostile world, but now she understood that she was no longer the same girl who had been cast aside in the desert. No longer simply the princess of a forgotten kingdom. No longer the fragile, innocent girl who had been at the mercy of her mother's cruelty. She was something else now. The ruins, ancient and crumbling as they were, seemed to hum in response, as if they too recognized her transformation. The walls pulsed faintly, and the shadows seemed to dance around them. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of wind stirring through the broken arches. Ryland, sensing the shift in Ember, took a cautious step forward, his eyes never leaving her. "Ember," he said softly, We need to leave before more danger finds us. This place is cursed, and I don't want to test it any further. Ember turned her gaze toward the dark corridor that led further into the ruins. For the first time since her arrival on this planet, she felt a strange sense of direction, as if the ancient stones were calling to her. She didn't understand it, but she knew there was something deeper waiting within the depths of these ruins, something that could help her understand the power she had just unlocked. For the first time in her life, she was no longer lost. "I want to know what this is," she said softly, almost to herself. "I need to understand it." Rylan nodded slowly, his eyes filled with concern, but also determination. "Then we'll find out together. But we're leaving this place for now. The ruins will be here when we return." Ember glanced once more at Varys, still slumped against the wall, his eyes glaring at her. Then, without another word, she turned toward the dark corridor, her steps sure and steady, her newfound power lingering just beneath the surface. She was no longer a princess at the mercy of others. She was something far more dangerous and far more powerful, and she was about to find out just how far that power could take her. The deeper they ventured into the ruins, the more the air seemed to shift, becoming colder, thicker, as if the stones themselves were alive, watching them. Ember moved with quiet determination, her senses heightened by the strange energy pulsing from within the walls. Rylan walked close behind, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, ever watchful. Every so often, a soft crunch of loose stone or the echo of their footsteps would break the silence, but even those sounds seemed hushed, swallowed by the ancient darkness. The flickering light of their torches cast shadows that twisted unervingly across the narrow, winding passages, giving the feeling that something or someone was always just out of sight. Ember's mind, though still clouded with confusion about the nature of her powers, felt more attuned to the surroundings than ever before. She could feel the weight of the air, thick with ancient secrets and forgotten memories. The knowledge that she was no longer the powerless girl who had been left in the desert filled her with both awe and trepidation. She was no longer merely a traveler on an unfamiliar planet. She was now an explorer of her own identity, a girl with powers she couldn't fully understand, yet felt more natural than anything in her past. She paused for a moment, her hand resting on the wall of smooth, cold stone. The vibrations she felt from the surface were subtle, but there was a distinct rhythm to them, almost like a heartbeat. She hadn't felt this before. The stones seemed to react to her touch, or maybe it was her powers reaching out to them. "What is it?" Rylan asked, noticing her sudden stillness. He had learned quickly that when Ember became quiet, it usually meant something was stirring inside her, something he didn't fully understand but knew instinctively to respect. "I can feel it," she said, her voice low and almost reverent. She removed her hand from the wall, her fingers tingling as if charged with static energy. "There's something here, something old." Rylan stepped closer, narrowing his eyes at the passage before them. "Old ruins usually hold secrets," he muttered, but there was a trace of unease in his voice. He didn't know how much longer he could play the part of protector if the ancient powers within Ember kept growing. The path ahead narrowed, leading them into a small, circular chamber, its ceiling far higher than the walls that surrounded it. Faded murals adorned the stone, depicting strange, mythical creatures, some with wings, others with multiple arms. But what caught Ember's eye the most was the center of the room. There, set into the floor, was an ornate, round pedestal covered in moss and dust, but still intact. Embedded in the stone was a shimmering gem, pulsating with a deep, eerie blue light. The light seemed to grow stronger the closer they got, beckoning them like a forgotten beacon. Ember's heart raced as she felt the familiar, almost magnetic pull toward it. She could sense the power in the gem. It was the same kind of energy she had felt in the desert, but now it was more intense, more defined. It felt like her very essence was calling out to it, a missing piece of herself being drawn to it. "Do you think it's safe?" Rylan asked, watching her as she stepped forward. "I don't know," Ember admitted, her voice barely a whisper. She extended her hand, trembling slightly as her fingertips brushed against the stone. The moment she touched it, The light flared brighter and stronger than before. A deep hum vibrated through the room, sending shivers down her spine. Suddenly, the gem shifted, as if it were alive. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the stone around it cracked open like the lid of a chest. Ember jumped back, startled, but the gem, now half exposed, still pulsed with that strange, magnetic energy. Rylan was at her side in an instant, eyes wide with concern. "Ember, don't touch it," he warned, but it was too late. Her hand was already reaching for the gem again this time, with more purpose. As her fingers wrapped around it, the air around her shimmered, the temperature dropping suddenly, sending a chill through her bones. Her vision blurred for a moment as a rush of images flooded her mind. She saw strange constellation stars that glowed with an unnatural hue. A dark figure, tall and cloaked, standing on a barren planet, speaking in an ancient tongue she didn't understand. The visions shifted, showing the very same alien kingdom she had come from. But it was a place of ruin, destroyed by forces she couldn't comprehend. Then there was a flash of something else, another world entirely, a world where her powers had been known, revered. And within that world, a name echoed in her mind, a name that felt both distant and familiar. "Valora," she gasped, pulling her hand away from the gem, her body trembling as she tried to make sense of the overwhelming surge of emotions and visions. Her mind was racing, but she couldn't form coherent thoughts. She knew, without a doubt, that this gem held answers that she desperately needed, but couldn't yet grasp. Rylan rushed to her side, his expression a mixture of worry and confusion. "Are you all right? What did you see?" He placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Ember stammered, her voice shaky. "I don't know. There was a name, Valora, and I saw my planet, but it was destroyed. There was so much I don't understand." Rylan frowned, clearly troubled. "Valora? That's not a name I've heard before. Could it be part of your world? Or maybe something connected to your powers?" "I don't know," Ember whispered, staring down at the gem as it continued to pulse in her hand. "But I feel like it's calling me. This gem, this place, it's important. It's tied to everything I've been through." At that moment, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. Rylan's head snapped around, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. Ember stepped closer to him, her eyes scanning the shadows at the entrance to the chamber. Out of the darkness, a figure emerged, another adventurer from their group. It was Jerek. His eyes glinted with a mixture of interest and something darker. A shadow of a smile played on his lips, but there was a tension in his posture, as if he had been watching them for longer than he should have. "I didn't expect to find you here," he said, his voice low, almost amused. "Seems like I stumbled on something interesting, huh?" Rylan's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be here, Jerek. We're in the middle of something dangerous." Jerek took a step closer, his gaze flickering to the glowing gem in Ember's hand. "Dangerous? Or just valuable?" His eyes lingered on the shimmering stone with a greed that didn't go unnoticed by Rylan. Ember felt the shift in atmosphere. Immediately, something in Jerek's demeanor didn't sit right. His interest in the gem seemed to go beyond mere curiosity. She tightened her grip around the stone, the faint blue glow intensifying. Rylan stepped forward, shielding Ember with his body. "I think it's time you tell us what you're really after, Jerek," he said, his voice sharp. "And if it's trouble you're looking for, we'll give it to you." Jerek's smile faded, his eyes hardening. "You've got it wrong, Rylan. I'm here for survival. But if you're going to be difficult about it..." The tension between them thickened, the air charged with the promise of conflict. But Ember, her heart still racing from the visions, sensed something deeper, something more dangerous lurking within Jerek. There was a darkness in him, a hunger that wouldn't be satisfied by mere treasure. The ancient stone beneath their feet groaned, as if the ruins themselves were awakening to the danger. And Ember knew, in that moment, that this was only the beginning. The gem had revealed part of the truth, but it had also set in motion something far more dangerous, and she had no idea just how far it would take her.